Save up to 65%. Call your travel agent or 1-800-SANDALS.
Tonight, how could this be happening in America? Citizens put in the crosshairs of their government by agents from the ATF.
They were looking for a way to scare us.
And Homeland Security.
Homeland Security raiding a guitar factory just makes no sense.
Environmental authorities threatening jail time.
We're going to use everything in the book to come after you.
And federal rangers staging a cattle grab.
Fully armed and fully ready to spoil for a fight.
These people discovered what it's like when a powerful force you thought was on your side turns against you.
And I'm not the only one. I'm speaking for thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe more.
Fox News reporting, Enemies of the State. From New York, here is John Scott.
Enemies of the state. The phrase conjures up Orwell, or perhaps the former Soviet Union, where an all-powerful government crushes any individual who stands up against it. But in truth, even in a representative democracy such as ours, if the government goes after you, it can be a nightmare. Tonight, we're going to show you several alarming stories in which government officials decide to take on private citizens. These people, who didn't and still don't believe they were breaking any rules, were suddenly in the fight of their lives, the full force of the government bearing down on them. And that's what makes it so scary. If it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. We start in Nevada, where John Roberts has the story of a family of ranchers who found their very way of life under attack.
The Western Rangelands, vast, scenic, and a battleground for what became known as the Sagebrush Rebellion, a fight that began decades ago between locals and the federal government over land use.
The Sagebrush Rebellion got its name from the type of vegetation on a lot of the federal land in the West. Ranchers are complaining that the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, doesn't identify with ranching problems.
Wayne Hage Sr. didn't plan to become the face of that rebellion, but that's just what happened.
When did your parents buy the Pine Creek Ranch?
June of 1978.
Wayne Hage Jr. was just 2 when his parents sold their California ranch and bought Pine Creek Ranch in central Nevada. In other words, he can't remember a time when his family hasn't had to fight the government.
They bought it for a place that they could raise a family on a ranch and continue their livestock business.
The ranch itself is more than 7,000 acres. The purchase also included exclusive access to more than 700,000 acres of adjoining land administered by the federal government, so-called open range. Wayne took a couple of days to show us around.
Do you really need that much property?
Yes, in this country it takes 320 acres to raise one cow for 1 year.
Now, the Hages couldn't afford to purchase 750,000 acres, so instead they paid for their smaller piece of private property and at the same time bought the rights to water and grazing on that larger spread. That's the way it's been done out here since the 1860s. These rights have been handed down through purchase or will for more than 100 years and are the reason a ranch like Pine Creek is economically viable. However, that extra land is public property, managed by the Forest Service and the BLM, and that's where the Hages say their problems began. It's not like they weren't warned.
My dad bought it knowing that there was a problem down there, but he had worked with the federal agencies in the previous ranch in California and got along with them. And he thought, well, I can work with these folks. Come to find out, you can't get along with somebody when they're actually trying to take your property.
Why would the government do that? The Hages say the feds were trying to strip them of their rights in order to take control of the land, partly for environmental reasons and the water, which in a desert state is like gold. In fact, many Western ranchers feel the government would like to end their way of life completely. No sooner had the Hage family settled in than the government offered to buy the ranch. Hage declined, so the government filed a claim for his water rights. Wayne Sr. wasn't having it. If the government wanted a fight is what it would get. He contested that claim, starting a battle that would consume the rest of his life.
In one 105-day grazing season, your family was visited by government employees 70 times, received an additional 40 certified letters containing various citations and notices. That's more than one visit by the government, in a sense, for every day that you are out there grazing.
That's right. One of the violations that they got my dad for, out of the many miles of fence that we have up on the mountain, one of these staples was missing out of one wire in the entire fence.
Where was that fence post?
That fence post was way on top of that mountain. We sent a man up there to go fix it.
How long did it take?
It took the man a full day.
Pound in a little staple and then get back down.
Exactly.
Is it fair to say that Pine Creek Ranch was in violation many times?
Probably to a strict T. Yeah, we fell in violation. There was no way to keep out of it. But to say were we in violations of the general terms and conditions of these permits that we're operating under compared to other ranchers? Absolutely not.
In 1989, a fed-up Wayne Sr. published a book on government abuse of property rights titled Storm Over Rangelands. The Hages claimed that in response, the government reacted by going after them even harder, and by the end of 1990, had suspended one of the Hages' essential grazing permits.
And we will be observing effects of cattle grazing to the resources.
The Forest Service made this video in 1991, laying out its case.
Excessive grazing is causing some of these more undesirable species like Kentucky bluegrass here, and they are tending to dominate the site now.
The feds claimed that Hage cattle were overgrazing that allotment and the land needed a 5-year rest to recover. They instructed the Hages to remove their cattle. The problem, Wayne says, is that the government couldn't clearly identify the boundaries of the forbidden area.
We were licensed to have cattle in the valley. But if cattle got up here in the mountains, they were going to be in trespass, and there's no fence dividing the two. There's 21 miles of unfenced boundary just on this portion alone. The Forest Service couldn't even tell us where the line was, but if a cow got on the other side of that line, they were going to impound that cow without notice.
That is exactly what happened.
So the cows actually got on that side of the line?
Yes.
So you were in trespass?
Yes. Technically, by the Forest Service regulations, we were in trespass.
On July 27, 1991, the Forest Service took action.
The government was coming in to take our cows on an impoundment, made a big production out of it. They had 10 federal agents, fully armed and fully ready to spoil for a fight.
It didn't turn into a Hollywood-style gunfight. Quite the opposite, actually. For the Hages, it was a big dose of reality. In all, the Forest Service impounded and eventually sold over 100 cattle. Then, they sent Hage a bill for the difference between the sale and the cost of confiscation.
That was the final straw, where it was virtually impossible to run cows anymore, because there's no guarantee that we could keep a cow on one side or the other of that imaginary line.
With little choice left, the Hages liquidated their herd. Their cattle ranching business was effectively shut down. There was only one option left. They sued the government, claiming their property had been taken without compensation or due process. Just 4 months later, as Wayne Sr. was doing maintenance to get water to his private property, the Forest Service charged him with a felony.
He cleaned a ditch.
He cleaned a ditch?
He did. The ditch was in disrepair. Now, you could not get water through the ditch. And then after we cleared those trees, they came and arrested my father and took him down and convicted him of destroying government property.
He was arrested, tried, convicted. Then you went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
And overturned. Yes, the Ninth Circuit threw that case out.
But the damage had been done. By the mid-1990s, the Hages were basically broke and had lost all their grazing permits. Both mother and father had to find other jobs to feed the family.
The stress was very significant, I think, for my mom especially.
Ramona Hage Morrison is one of Wayne's 4 big sisters.
She had 5 kids. She was running this house, and then this situation with the government on top of it was very difficult for her.
1996, your mother passed away at a young age, complications from stroke. Your sister said she believes it was the stress of government harassment that contributed to your mother's death.
Oh, I believe very much that is the case. She was a very sweet lady and very strong lady. But there's only so much a person can take.
The Hages' last hope The lawsuit against the government continued to wend its way through the system. Then, in 2006, Wayne Hage Sr., who'd fought so hard for his way of life, lost a battle with cancer.
Buried my mother, my father. We buried a lot of people on this deal, people who had stood up and tried to do what was right. After a while, it does get to you. It wears you down.
The Hage patriarch was gone, but the fight was far from over. The torch had been passed from father to son, and the most amazing part of the story was still to come.
We'll return to the Hages struggle with some surprising twists and turns a bit later, but next, a government invasion isn't music to the ears of a guitar company. Making guitars is a craft, and sometimes, apparently, it's also a crime. John Roberts took his act on the road to Tennessee to bring us this story.
Tommy Shaw, lead guitarist of Styx, says this about Gibson guitars.
It was my choice of guitars when I was little. It was my dream guitar. It's still I still dream of Gibsons. Yeah.
The musical world agrees. Gibson, in business for over a century, has 3 domestic factories, 2 in Tennessee and 1 in Montana.
This company's been around for a long time. It was founded in 1894.
The one in Memphis has daily tours, so visitors can see a guitar made practically from scratch. But on November 17th, 2009, someone else showed up at Gibson's door.
Mid-morning, I get a call that Homeland Security was raiding our factory.
Gibson CEO Henry Jeskowitz, a musician himself, has been running the company since 1986.
I thought it was a joke because, you know, Homeland Security raiding a guitar factory just makes no sense.
Armed federal agents showed up at Gibson's Nashville headquarters and their factory 2 miles away. Nashville manufacturing supervisor Carlton Sanders was on site that day.
The agents came in and told us to back away from our desk. And I kind of vividly remember that, you know, who are these people?
They weren't looking for bombs. They weren't looking for terrorists. They were looking for wood.
What did you find when you got to the factory?
There were several dozen armed agents, and they were taking a lot of wood, and it was kind of a bizarre situation.
The Fish and Wildlife Service were there, along with Homeland Security. They claimed the wood, imported from Madagascar, violated a conservation law known as the Lacey Act. But Gibson said it was the same wood they used all along, wood that many other companies use for their products.
We had affidavits from the country of Madagascar and their officials saying that we complied with all of their laws, which the government took exception to.
Then, on August 24, 2011, nearly 2 years after the first raid, while Gibson was still waiting for formal charges, it happened again.
I seen the badges on their sleeves and I was like, oh wow, here we go again.
This time, Gibson was accused of illegally purchasing wood from India.
The first thing that the officer in charge said was, I need for you to cut off your security camera first, and then I need you to shut down all your operations.
That same day, the feds simultaneously conducted a raid of the factory in Memphis, too.
That's when it became very clear to me that they were not doing well in court. We were showing the fact that we really had done nothing wrong, and I think they just jumped on any excuse to intimidate us.
Last month, agents raided the Gibson Guitar Factory in Tennessee.
Speaker of the House John Boehner took note of Gibson's travails and decided the problem wasn't with Gibson.
Gibson, a well-respected American company that employs thousands of people.
But with an overreaching federal government.
Excessive regulations are making it harder for our economy to create jobs.
Still, in 2012, the company chose to settle with the government. Gibson paid a $300,000 fine, a $50,000 community service payment, and also admitted to violating the law relating to Madagascar, forfeiting the wood seized in the first raid. We reached out to the Department of Justice, which pointed out that admission of criminal wrongdoing on Gibson's part, but officials declined to speak with us about it. Homeland Security deferred to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which led the investigation. They declined to speak with us about the raid as well.
We just wanted to bury the situation. If that's what it took to get the government off our back, okay.
Today, Gibson is back to producing instruments as it always has, but is using extra caution when purchasing its overseas wood. But for Jeskowitz, that still doesn't take away the sting.
Somebody chose us for some reason, and there was no good reason to choose Gibson. We were harassed, goods were seized, our business, was injured, we had to pay lawyers.
As for the controversial Indian wood, the government eventually determined that Gibson indeed purchased it legally. They returned the seized wood to the factory, where Gibson put it to good use.
We put it into what we call the government series guitars, which commemorated the raid and has been extremely well received.
Tommy Shaw and I jammed on one.
Are you the sort of guy who likes to stick his finger in the government's eye?
No, I like to make guitars. I like to build new things.
Excellent, well done.
Nice. When we return, the oil industry in this country is going through something of a boom, but that hasn't prevented some people in it from getting busted. Welcome back. An Oklahoma oil man thought he could help save the economy, but ended up having to fight to save his company. Greg Jarrett reports.
Meet Harold Ham. He's the founder and CEO of Continental Resources, the 14th largest oil company in America. A child of Oklahoma sharecroppers, he went to work as a teenager in the oil fields there, first as a roughneck, then a wildcatter. About 10 years ago, he led the charge in opening up the vast Bakken oil and gas fields of the Northern Plains, using innovative extraction techniques such as hydraulic fracturing, better known as fracking.
This new technology would allow America to become energy independent.
It will. We've had estimates made by experts in our field now that we could add as much as 3 to 5 million barrels of new oil per day.
On July 18, 2011, Ham was invited to the White House for a giving summit with other wealthy Americans such as Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who, like Ham, had pledged to give away at least half their fortunes to charity.
You had the opportunity to speak with President Obama.
I did.
What happened?
I wanted him to know for sure of the opportunity that we had, and we were creating a whole new renaissance of American oil and gas. And there's a lot of good things that come from that. Good middle-class jobs, for instance. National security, balance of trade.
And his reaction?
He didn't want to hear it, and he didn't hear it.
It says so much about President Obama's mindset, that discussion.
Louisiana Senator David Vitter is the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, which has jurisdiction over energy issues.
Hydraulic fracturing and the advent of cheap, reliable American natural gas has been an absolute economic boom for our country. That's exactly what President Obama and his allies want to shut down.
Ham's encounter with the president was not the first time he'd been made aware of the administration's take on his industry.
It was kind of like how the Romans used to, conquer little villages in the Mediterranean.
That's Al Armendariz, a regional EPA head handpicked by the White House, caught on tape in May of 2010 explaining, metaphorically, how he planned to deal with non-compliant oil and gas producers.
They'd go into a little Turkish town somewhere, they'd find the first 5 guys they saw, they'd crucify them.
Later that year, Ham got a first-hand taste of this philosophy.
Armendariz. He appeared before the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association at a meeting, right? What happened?
He told the group straight on that I'm the new sheriff in town, that we're going to use everything in the book to come after you.
What was the reaction of the people there?
Shock, disbelief, shock and awe.
There have been abuses by federal agencies before, but the Obama EPA is unfortunately at the top of that bad list in terms of really using overtly threatening behavior.
Still, at least until his meeting with President Obama, Ham had been hopeful he could change the mind of the administration. But while he couldn't get through to the president, 2 weeks after that White House summit, the Department of Justice got through to him. On August 2nd, 2011, they brought criminal charges against his company, Continental Resources. The crime? Killing a bird.
One bird. One bird.
Ham's company was charged with violating the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 after a special agent of the Fish and Wildlife Service found this dead bird in a reserve pit used to collect the waste and mud from drilling.
One bird died allegedly because of your operation.
Yes.
And the Department of Justice is going to go after you criminally to prosecute.
Yes.
That prosecution by the Justice Department is another clear example of a political anti-oil and gas agenda on steroids.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said the charge against Continental Resources had nothing to do with fracking, but only reflected the company's failure to take steps to protect birds. But to Ham, the administration simply didn't like what he was doing, and they were using whatever means at their disposal to get at him. He decided to fight.
We probably should have just rolled over and paid, the fine and faced the music and been quicker and probably cheaper and all that instead of hiring attorneys and going through the case. But we chose to do that.
On January 17, 2012, Ham's strategy was vindicated. Judge Daniel Hovland of the U.S. District Court in North Dakota dismissed all charges against Ham's company. The judge noted that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was not meant to criminalize anything that inadvertently killed birds. Otherwise, the government would have to criminalize driving cars, flying planes, putting windows in buildings, even owning a cat.
Do you think they're going after you?
I do. In fact, it's a little bit more than thinking that they're going after us, but it's an attempt to shut us down.
Do you worry about speaking so candidly with us?
I guess I should worry about that, but sometimes you have to do what's right.
When we come back, a woman who made it publicly known that she doesn't much like the way things are going in Washington gets caught up in a Kafka-esque world of endless government proceedings. And later we'll bring you up to date on Wayne Hage's fight to save the family ranch. Continuing now with Fox News reporting, enemies of the state. They say you can't fight City Hall. Well, imagine what it's like to take on the White House.
Citizens just like me are being targeted by an administration willing to take any action necessary to silence opposition.
This is Catherine Engelbrecht testifying before Congress in February.
I come before you today, Mr. Chairman, on behalf of Americans just like me, asking for a solution to end this ugly chapter of political intimidation.
It's a House hearing on the IRS targeting of conservative groups, like those headed by Ms. Engelbrecht. Earlier in January, I sat down with her in Houston, Texas, to hear her story.
I was married and raising kids and live out in the country. My goal was just to be left alone to live the life that I think every American's entitled to.
We made 6 of these.
About 20 years ago, she and her husband Brian started up Engelbrecht Manufacturing, which makes oil drilling equipment.
My name's Catherine Engelbrecht, for those of you that might be with us for the first time tonight.
However, in 2009, unhappy about what was going on in Washington, she got involved in politics, founding the King Street Patriots. Is it a Tea Party group?
We absolutely identify with Tea Party ideals.
That same year, Engelbrecht started True the Vote, an electoral watchdog group.
We look to see if there are people who are registered more than once or dead people registered in voting. And then we advocate for common sense reforms.
In the summer of 2010, she applied for tax-exempt status for both groups, which could help her organizations grow by letting donors write off their contributions.
To the new speaker.
In the 2010 elections, Republicans swept to historic gains, taking the House and picking up 6 seats in the Senate. Meanwhile, Engelbrecht was still waiting to hear about her group's status. Had you heard anything about your your application 6 or 7 months later?
No. No, we hadn't heard anything, and I didn't have any point of reference like what was normal.
I've done this for dozens and dozens and dozens of organizations going back for many years.
Cleta Mitchell, a Washington, D.C. tax attorney, represents Catherine Engelbrecht.
That processing would take 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 2 months.
Then in February 2012, about a year and a half after Engelbrecht first applied for tax-exempt status, the IRS requested more information.
They wanted to see my Twitter feed. They wanted to see every Facebook posting I'd ever posted. They wanted to know if I had political aspirations. They wanted my resume. They wanted to know, this is the one that always gets me, they wanted to know everywhere I'd ever spoken since the inception of the organization and to whom and what I said.
When director of the IRS Exempt Organization Division, Lois Lerner, was later asked by the House Oversight Committee about all the questions Tea Party groups were required to answer, she claimed it was, quote, in the ordinary course of the application process.
Those are lies, and we can prove it's not true by looking at the data and looking at the process before 2010.
In October of 2012, the IRS sent Engelbrecht yet another round of questions. The following month, Barack Obama swept to a second term.
The net effect of the IRS's targeting of our organization was absolutely the limiting of how far we could reach and how many people we could engage.
So why do you think the IRS behaved in the way it did?
Because it could.
On May 10, 2013, in anticipation of an Inspector General report critical of the IRS, Lois Lerner admitted that her agency had indeed inappropriately targeted Tea Party groups for additional scrutiny.
I was glad to hear that she spoke the truth. I mean, of course they have. What else is this?
Morning, everybody. Please have a seat.
3 days later, President Obama, who insisted that he had first heard about the IRS targeting by reading the papers, spoke to the press.
If, in fact, IRS personnel engaged in the kind of practices that have been reported on and were intentionally targeting conservative groups, then that's outrageous.
And a day later, Attorney General Eric Holder announced he'd ordered a Justice Department probe into the IRS abuses.
But we are examining the facts to see if there were criminal violations.
The defense generally from the IRS has been, we're not malevolent, we're just incompetent.
Oh, I sleep a lot better thinking that.
In January 2014, the Department of Justice made it known that though its investigation has not been completed, there were no plans to file criminal charges over the IRS scrutiny of conservative groups. President Obama had this to say to Fox's Bill O'Reilly during their Super Bowl Sunday conversation.
You're saying no corruption? No. None?
No. There were some boneheaded decisions out of a
but
local
no
office.
Mass corruption?
Not even mass corruption, not even a smidgen of corruption, obviously.
Okay.
Engelbrecht is not convinced.
It was open season on political targets. This administration has taken the IRS and used it to its own effect as a weapon. And that should send a chill through every American citizen, whether or not you're conservative.
But as Engelbrecht found out, this was only the beginning.
Getting a letter from the IRS can be pretty scary, but not as scary as having government agents show up at your doorstep. More on Catherine Engelbrecht's ordeal when we return. In the case of Catherine Engelbrecht, it seemed the IRS was dragging its feet in granting her tax-exempt status. But there are a lot of other government agencies, and she seemed to be keeping them plenty busy.
Catherine Engelbrecht applied for tax-exempt status for her political groups in mid-2010. She endured more than 3 years of inaction from the IRS. By late 2013, after becoming a poster child for alleged IRS abuse, her groups were finally granted tax-exempt status. But during that long wait, the IRS kept her occupied in other ways.
Aside from the tax-exempt business,
Right.
you had more run-ins with the IRS. Tell us about that.
The IRS showed up to audit our business. And we'd never been audited before, so here again, you think, well, maybe I just drew the short straw. And we went through the audits. Those audits of our businesses led to personal audits.
In fact, it suddenly seemed the government was interested in every aspect of Engelbrecht's life. In December of 2010, FBI agents made a surprise visit to the meeting place of her Tea Party group, the King Street Patriots in Houston, to ask Engelbrecht a series of questions.
It was the domestic terrorism unit, and they wanted information on somebody that attended one of our meetings.
You think the FBI thought you were involved with terrorists?
I don't know what they thought.
Did they ever offer you an explanation as to why they were asking all these questions?
No.
And they either showed up or called you to check up half a dozen times?
Right.
That doesn't happen to most people.
So they tell me.
Then in February 2012, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms showed up unannounced at the Engelbrecht's manufacturing business in Rosenberg, Texas. As it happens, the Engelbrechts are licensed to manufacture firearms. They say they never have.
We don't make them.
Had you ever had this kind of inspection before from the ATF?
No. No.
What were they looking for?
They were looking for a way to scare us.
In July of 2012, yet another federal agency, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, showed up unannounced at the Engelbrechts' business to conduct a surprise inspection. After spending 2 full days scouring the business for workplace violations, OSHA found several infractions. For example, a forklift operator wasn't using a seatbelt. OSHA imposed some hefty fines.
I think our tally for that little tour was about $22,000, something like that.
$22,000?
Maybe a little more than that.
So 4 federal agencies are now looking at the Engelbrechts: the IRS, the ATF, the FBI, and OSHA. Isn't it possible that this was all just a coincidence?
Wouldn't that be great? But you start stacking it all up, and at some point, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
We called up these agencies and asked for a response. The IRS said they were legally prevented from disclosing any information. The FBI did not reply. The ATF said they were within their rights to make a warrantless inspection, and OSHA said theirs was just a routine random inspection. Did you ever ask any of these agents or agencies why the sudden interest in you and your lives?
No, they were just following orders.
Where did the orders come from?
There's the question.
In addition to all this attention from government agencies, Engelbrecht was soon piquing the interest of some high-placed names in Washington. Some Democrats complained that electoral watchdog groups such as True the Vote were really engaged in voter suppression, particularly of minorities.
What True the Vote does is zero in on students, African Americans, people who would normally vote Democratic.
Just days before the election, Robert Bauer, serving as general counsel of Obama for America, a man who had been demanding investigations into Republican groups for years, issued a memorandum claiming that True the Vote was part of a Republican disenfranchisement program engaged in possibly illegal intimidation tactics. What did you think when you saw that memo?
I thought, boy, that puts it in the West Wing, doesn't it?
Here you have the former White House counsel to President Obama and the former general counsel to his re-election campaign and the Democratic National Committee accusing you of some pretty horrendous things. How did that feel?
I know who we are. I know what we do. I know what we're about. They're lies.
You have been quoted as saying that they picked the wrong chick. What do you mean by that?
That if this is an attempt to silence me, they've got another thing coming. I know exactly what I'm here to do, and I mean to do it. And I'm not the only one. I'm speaking for thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe more citizens who've had these types of experiences. We will not be silenced.
Catherine Engelbrecht has been dealing with the government for 4 years now. But when we come back, we'll rejoin Wayne Hage, whose family has been battling the government through 6 separate administrations. How did his story end? Or has it? When we last left the Hage family saga, Wayne Hage Sr., who'd been clashing with the government since soon after he bought Pine Creek Ranch in 1978, had died. So it turned out Wayne Jr.'s birthright wasn't just the ranch, but the struggle to keep it. John Roberts tells us the amazing story of the degrees to which he went to save the ranch.
In 2006, it was Wayne Hage Jr.'s turn to fight the battle that had taken up over a quarter century of his father's life. In fact, he soon had a new case to deal with, because Wayne Sr. in his final years had gradually built up a new herd of cattle, but still didn't have a grazing permit. This time, however, when the government threatened to impound more of the Hages' livestock, there was a new sheriff in town. Literally.
I was informed by my deputies that they're going to do a cattle seizure.
Tony DeMeo has been sheriff of Nye County, Nevada since 2003.
They didn't have a court order, and they were just doing on a signature of a bureaucrat within the BLM. And I told them, I said, if you get your SWAT team, we'll be facing our SWAT team on the property of Mr. Wayne Hage to prevent you from doing any unlawful seizure.
Why did Tony DeMeo want to put himself between the federal government and the Hages?
Because it was illegal. It was wrong.
The feds gave up on the idea of seizing more of Hages' cattle. But in 2007, they did file a civil trespass suit against Wayne Jr. and his father's estate. With that case pending, along with the one his father filed against the government years before, the legal bills were adding up. Wayne Jr. couldn't afford to pay lawyers and keep the ranch afloat.
You decided to go to law school of a form to represent yourself.
And I knew at that point in time how much attorneys cost, so I figured it was cheaper for me to learn the law than it was to hire an attorney. I had to quit ranching and to lock myself in my office and devote myself full-time to the litigation.
Your sister Ramona summarized the court action this way: 13 trial weeks, 100 plus depositions, 50 case file boxes, 47,000 pages of documents, and 1,230 trial exhibits. Do you feel like your life has become a courtroom drama?
There's certain times it does feel like it, yes.
On June 6, 2008, the Court of Federal Claims, established to hear monetary claims against the U.S. government, ruled on the case first brought by Wayne Hage Sr. almost 17 years earlier. The family prevailed. Judge Lauren Smith awarded the Hage estate more than $4 million, plus another $10 million in interest and attorney's fees. The trespass case, already a year into litigation, would take almost 5 more to sort out. On May 24, 2013, the Hages won another victory. Chief Judge Robert C. Jones of the U.S. District Court in Nevada filed this 104-page ruling, ordering the government to renew their permits. He also found that the government pressured Hage business associates not to do business with them, and that officials conspired to deprive the Hages of their vested water rights.
The judge said some of the things that were done by agents of the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service shocked the conscience of the court.
He said that several times, that it shocked the conscience of the court, and that it shocked his own.
The court did find instances where the Hages willfully allowed cattle to wander onto unpermitted federal lands. The cost of the damage? $165.88. It was a long-awaited vindication and a historic ruling for all Western ranchers fighting for property rights. Even though the Hages won back their rights, they still haven't had their permits renewed. Meanwhile, the U.S. is appealing the case.
Do you have any reason to believe that they'll back off?
I don't think they'll back off. I asked the Department of Justice attorney. I said, are you interested in settling the case? And he said, no, we always win at the Ninth Circuit. That's our court, and we'll reverse this.
In addition, the Hages haven't seen a dime of the $14 million they were awarded in 2008. In fact, in that case, if the latest court ruling stands, they never will. We had hoped to talk to the U.S. Forest Service about all of this to get its side of the story, but they wouldn't talk to Fox News, citing pending litigation. The Bureau of Land Management sent a statement saying, quote, since the appeals process is ongoing, the BLM will not engage in conversations that could affect the outcome. The BLM will respond to questions once litigation concludes. The U.S. Department of Justice also declined our interview requests.
The Subcommittee on Public Lands and Environmental Regulations is meeting today to hear testimony on threats, intimidation, and bullying by federal land managing agencies.
In late October 2013, Wayne Hage and a group of fellow ranchers testified before Congress.
Now, I'm probably going to get retribution for just even being here and talking to you about this. Stories that make the hair stand on the back of your neck. They're never held accountable. Now, in our case, they were supposed to be held accountable.
Perhaps the hearing will lead to congressional action on regulatory relief. But until then, Wayne Hage Jr. continues the decades-long fight he inherited from his father.
Go back to the time when your dad was considering buying the Pine Creek Ranch. What would you say to him?
I'd say buy it.
Really?
Never ask for an easy life. Just ask for the strength to get through it. Yeah, I'd do it again.
So we've seen 4 examples in which private citizens had trouble with the federal government. In each of our examples, the government had its side of the story, but to the people we talked to, it wasn't a fair fight. The truth is our government is so big and there are so many laws that there's barely a citizen who isn't breaking or stretching some regulation somewhere. And that means most any public official with the inclination has the capacity to make you jump through hoops in ways no one else can. Part of the social contract is we vote for our leaders and then cede them the power to enforce and make the rules. And thus, it's essential that this tremendous power never be used for ideological or personal purposes. Ideally, the government should fear the people, not the other way around. Because when those roles are reversed, suddenly more and more citizens start feeling like enemies of the state. That's our program for tonight. Thanks for watching.